this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? The right people can turn any drive into a great memory. That's something Toyota really believes. They design vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who make plans happen and bring everyone together. Inside, everything's built with passengers in mind. Comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that actually works so everyone can relax and enjoy the ride. There's room for the people, room for the stuff, and room for the moments that happen along the way. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people. Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, and this episode 1084 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the topic today, I just want to send another reminder that the Late Round Prospect Guide is currently available for pre-order, and it's better than ever. This year's guide includes an outline of what goes into the models, prospect profiles for every running back, wide receiver, and tight end who was at the combine, over 30 year 2 profile write-ups, there's rankings, and more. It'll launch in mid-March, so pre-order it now at $14.99 because that's going to rise to $19.99 in just a couple of weeks. You can find out more over on lateround.com. When I tell people that I have prospect models, they often respond with something NFL Combine related. That if I'm inputting a bunch of data, clearly the Combine's going to play a role in how well the model likes a player. But really, there aren't a ton of inputs in the models that have to deal with the NFL Combine. Sort of. Speed score matters for running backs and tight ends, and height and weight measurements, those were all taken from the NFL Combine. So I can't say that nothing matters at the Combine as it relates to the ZAP model. But I've seen a lot of discourse on social media this week about what does and doesn't matter. How wide receiver 40s are irrelevant, how this drill or that drill, how none of it really matters, at least analytically. I don't totally agree with all of that, because not only are there direct inputs for me like height, weight, and speed score, but draft capital is the single most important input in these ZAP models. Where these dudes get drafted. And even though it's true that NFL teams often overdraft wide receivers when they're really, really fast, how players perform at the Combine is still more than likely having an impact on draft capital. When you think of it from that perspective, even if our little models in our corner of this football world may not care that much about what happens in Indianapolis each year, what's happening in Indy is still having a pretty real impact on the landscape overall at running back, wide receiver, and tight end. Now, as you know, the Combine just concluded for this year's class, and naturally, there's a lot to talk about. On today's show, I'm going to go through who I think are the biggest winners and losers from that Combine, keeping this whole draft capital impact in mind. Let's do it. One of the main stories from this year's Combine was how fast the wide receiver group was. We had 11 wideouts run faster than a 4.4 40. That was one of the highest marks that we've seen at the Combine, dating back to when the thing started. This is going to undoubtedly get a lot of players pushed up draft boards who probably shouldn't be pushed up draft boards. Some of them I don't mind as players necessarily, but the vast majority of them have serious problems with their production profiles. Like Zachariah Branch. I talked about this at length in the Perspectives episode last week, but Branch, to me, fits the mold of the type of wide receiver that's just completely burned teams in the past. Consistently. This is straight from this year's prospect guide. It says, if Branch is selected inside the top 100, as NFL Mock Draft Database currently projects, he'll be the 11th player drafted in that range since 2020 with a career behind the line target share above 30%, and the first to exceed 40%. Only 2 players in that bucket, Wan'Dale Robinson and Luther Burden, posted breakout scores above 75, which, by the way, Zachariah Branch way below that 75 mark. The others, Lynn Bowden, Amari Rogers, Anthony Schwartz, Kadarius Toney, Rondale Moore, Velus Jones, Trey Tucker, and Malachi Corley. I know you guys have heard this before. I've said this now multiple times on the podcast, but it's important to repeat. Zachariah Branch's production profile is not very strong. And then there's Deion Burks. Burks is getting some love from bigger name draft experts. An NFL mock draft database right now has him as a potential day 2 pick. But he has a 1.35 career yards per route run rate. That's third worst in the class. Since 2020, the ZAP model has 24 wide receivers who have entered the league with career yards per route run rates below 1.5. The only one to provide any meaningful fantasy production is Josh Palmer. Jeff Caldwell tested like an absolute beast when his production profile isn't overly special. Brendan Thompson, he's kind of interesting as like a Tank Dell, maybe Calvin Austin type player. And he ran the fastest 40 of the group. That was expected. But even his production profile has some flaws. And there's Bryce Lance, Trey Lance's brother. He tested really, really well. He ran a 4.3 440 at 6'3 204. I guarantee you that people are going to fall in love with him. They're going to slap that Christian Watson comp on him and go after him in rookie drafts. And look, for any of these guys, I see the vision. I see the vision with Bryce Lance. I don't think they're auto busts. I'm just telling you that a lot more marks don't favor them than do favor them. For Lance, he broke out very late to the point where he doesn't even have a breakout score in the model. And he's going to be over 24 and a half years old at draft time. That's a clear red flag, even if that upside case is evident. There's a lot of that in this year's class. I alluded to this in the wide receiver prospects who produce like studs episode. But I do think we're bound to see one or two of these guys really buck some trends this year just because of the sheer number of wide receivers in this class who are fine, but not special. Fine prospects will slip through the cracks. I'm talking about fine analytically. And sometimes, every once in a while, athleticism will translate. So I'm not going to be shocked if someone like Bryce Lance makes a legit impact in the NFL. It's just that over the long run, if you generally fade the uber athletes who didn't produce in college, you're going to win out. And when I say produce in college, I mean good age-adjusted production. And there's a lot of that in this year's class. The combine really showed that. We have some really good athletes, but the production profiles, they're not amazing. Nevertheless, all those guys that I just mentioned, they were winners. I'd expect better draft capital now that the combine is over. Jeremiah Love was already far and away the best running back in this year's class, and nothing from the combine remotely changed that. I've had a lot of people ask me if he's better than Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs or Ashton Jeanty as a prospect, if the ZAP model likes him more or less. And the answer is that the ZAP model still likes him less. But as I've discussed, it really doesn't matter. He's still an incredibly great prospect. And his comps, they're just stud after stud after stud. I really don't want people to get hung up on the fact that he's going to likely be an elite producer as opposed to a legendary performer. These are tags within the ZAP model. That's just a quick and dirty label to help us wrap our heads around the scores. To me, he's a fantastic prospect. And his 4.3 640 at 212 pounds, which gave him a 117 speed score, that just cemented that. The model just has a decent amount of weight for the receiving metrics, and his receiving numbers in college, they were great, not excellent. Love is the rookie 101 in all formats. I actually don't think it's very close when you consider the hit rates for these early first-round running backs and the talent and size profile that he's bringing to the table. And with so many running backs not even running the 40 at the combine this year, and with the position just being super thin overall, Jeremiah Love is a clear winner stemming from the combine. Now, like I just talked about, this running back class, it hasn't had this obvious RB2 in it. I talked about Emmett Johnson possibly being that guy because of his great receiving profile. I'll talk about him in just a second. But the running back who probably saw his stock rise most, who someone now places the RB2 in this class, was Mike Washington out of Arkansas. Now, Washington had a minor red flag in adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt within the ZAP model. But overall, the production profile could be worse. He had a best season reception share above 12%. His best season in adjusted yards per team play was 1.87. That was fifth best in the class. Maybe he's a little bit older, but he won't be 23 until the summer. I'm not even that concerned about age. Meanwhile, his size is good. He's 6'1", 223 pounds. And at that size, he ran a 4.33 40 at the combine. That is absurd. That generated the second best speed score in ZAP model history, trailing only Keith Marshall. And he barely trailed Marshall. Speed score is an input in the ZAP model, so Washington's great speed score gave him a little bit of a bump to his overall ZAP score. But I think it's unbelievably important to know that it doesn't just completely change his outlook. In fact, if he ran a 4.43 instead of a 4.33, without any change in draft capital, his ZAP score would barely change at all. What I think happened with Washington, though, is what I said at the top. Even at running back, a showing like that can improve a player's draft stock. It will improve it, especially when there's no clear-cut RB2 in this draft class. Washington has a pretty good profile. Now, I don't think it's elite, but I think it's good enough to the point where I wouldn't be shocked if he goes day 2 in the draft. And in this running back class, where it's pretty weak after Jeremiah Love, that matters a lot. Now, speaking of Emmett Johnson, let's talk about him. Something that we all need to keep in mind is that these days when players test at the combine, in my opinion, it's for one of two reasons. Number one, they're not locked into a particular draft spot and they want to prove their worth, even if they're not as athletic as they probably should be. I'm talking like day 3 picks who want to prove that they can be day 2 guys, or undrafted players who just want to get drafted. They want to show why they should be drafted, so they test. And then number 2, they test because they just know they're athletic. Jeremiah Love did this. He was going to go high no matter what, but he saw an opportunity to just lock that in, whereas other players often don't want to risk that. What that means is that we're moving more and more to a sample of players who are just generally athletic, because the players who aren't athletic are waiting for their pro days to test. Now, with all that being said, Emmett Johnson posted the worst speed score in the class at 93.4, which honestly wasn't a huge surprise if you watch him play. He's not a long speed guy, and actually, his 10-yard split was more middle of the road in this class. That just plays into the long speed idea even more. Now, I'm not overly concerned about that speed score. We've seen this pass-catching archetype not bring the craziest speed scores in the past. The problem for Johnson, in my opinion, was that he decided to do the 3-cone, and he was the only running back to do it. And it resulted in like a 25th percentile rate. I'm at the point with Emmett Johnson where I think he needs to find a very specific landing spot in order to thrive in fantasy football as a 3-down back. His top comps in the model are Michael Carter, Kenneth Gainwell, and James White. All of them had their moments. And I think Johnson can have his too. But to be a Kyren Williams type, he needs to find a team that's going to just fall in love with him the way the Rams did with Williams. And maybe there's like an Aaron Jones-like outcome here too. But all of these situations just tells you that we need some nuance when evaluating Johnson and his transition to the NFL. Overall, it was an L for him at this year's combine, even within this below average running back class. Jeremy Bernard continues to be a very tough prospect for me during this draft cycle. I know a lot of analytical models, they're not going to like him. He had a career 1.9 yards per route run rate. And typically, day 2 wide receivers have underperformed versus draft capital expectation by almost 2 PPR points per game when they've been under that 2.0 mark. But the ZAP model looks at versatility too. And Bernard had that. He got rushing work. And I've said this before on the show, but Bernard played in Washington before going to Alabama. He was on that team with Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, Rome Odunze, and Denzel Boston. And he was able to see a lot more production in that offense than Boston did. Now, they're different types of wide receivers, but I still think that's noteworthy. Bernard ran a solid 40 at 206 pounds, and then he went out, he had the best 3-cone of any player at the combine. That fits his profile pretty well. He's quick, he's a good yards after the catch guy, he's got the right build for that kind of thing, that kind of role. I do think that we could be looking at a Paris Campbell type prospect though. That's the fear. That's in his range of outcomes. In fact, so many of his comps in the ZAP model consist of busts, unfortunately. But even if the analytics community is more out than in with Bernard, I'm still kind of intrigued, especially after this good combine. I thought Ted Hurst was another winner at this year's combine. I've let it be known that I don't think he has the greatest production profile in the world, especially when adjusted for strength of schedule. He played at Georgia State. His breakout score, it ranks in the 54th percentile. That's good. It's not great. His best season in yards per team pass attempt was only 2.14. But there's definitely some intrigue with this archetype. It's often a go big or go home archetype. It's a high variance one. And post-combine, according to the ZAP model, his third best comp is Nico Collins. Now, that's not even considering the fact that he had a 95th percentile speed score while having the best broad jump in the class. Considering Hurst is coming from a smaller program at Georgia State, having a good combine was so important. And in my opinion, he had a great one. Carnell Tate was listed at 6'3", 195 pounds in college. At the combine, he came in at 6'2", 192 pounds. It's not significant, but it is a little bit smaller than what we initially thought. That wasn't the problem for Tate, though. The bigger issue was he's a vertical threat who ran a 4.53 40. Now, after that 40, there was a tweet that came out from Adam Schefter, and it said, quote, Ohio State wide receiver Carnell Tate, a potential top 10 pick, was timed by several NFL executives and GMs on Saturday with a 40 time in the range of 4.45 to 4.47 seconds. Although the combine registers official times, teams always conduct their own timing, and those measurements with some teams were lower than his clocked 4.52, which actually was a 4.53. What I found funny about that was, number one, there seemed to be a little bit of damage control going on. Let's be honest. But number two, within the ZAP model, pro day numbers, they're adjusted by 0.05. We add that to the 40 time because often we'll get faster times at pro days. A little home cooking. And what's funny is that if you make those adjustments to Tate, you get a pretty similar 40 as his clock time. Now look, this changes absolutely nothing in the ZAP model for Tate, kind of. I mean, there is a chance that Tate now goes lower in the NFL draft because of this. Honestly, I'm not sure why he even ran if he was in this vicinity for the 40, since he was already likely to be a high-end pick. But regardless, if he falls a few spots in the draft because of this, number one, I think that's silly. But number two, it could impact his ZAP score just slightly. I'm calling him out today because yes, he was a loser at the combine. But no, I wouldn't really care that deeply about what happened there. I think Tate's a good prospect. I don't think he's as elite as the other Ohio State guys who have come out over the last half decade or so, but he's a very good prospect. Seth McGowan was a really interesting winner at the combine this year. For those who don't know him, he's a running back who kind of went all over the place in college. He started in Oklahoma in 2020, was dismissed due to legal issues which were eventually dropped, took some time off, went to Butler Community College, transferred to New Mexico State where he played with the aforementioned Mike Washington, and then he finished things off in 2025 in Kentucky. Considering he started in 2020, yes, he's old. He's over 25 years old actually, which is incredibly uncommon for a running back and should make us not go crazy with him. But I thought he had a good combine. His vertical and broad jumps put him in the 99th percentile in burst score according to Player Profiler, and he ran a 4.49 40 at 215 pounds. That's a great speed score. He was arguably the most athletic running back in this class behind Mike Washington. Again, I think the age profile here, it's definitely a huge red flag. You should not prioritize him early on in your rookie drafts. But McGowan is definitely someone that you should keep an eye on. Kenyon Sadiq absolutely destroyed the combine at tight end. I haven't talked about a ton of tight ends because I've been so focused on running back and wide receiver. But Brandon Gadula and I, we've been working on the modeling side of things for the position. And we're in a great place with it now. Actually, on Wednesday, I'll be sending out a newsletter about that new tight end model. You can check that out by signing up for the free newsletter, lateround.com. But Sadiq had a 100th percentile 40 in speed score while also crushing his jumps. I mean, he tests as basically the best tight end athlete, at least one of them, in combine history. And I would imagine that his draft capital is going to rise as a result of that. Sadiq looks good in the tight end model. If he goes top 10, he'll have a real shot to land in that legendary performer category. But right now, he's just an elite producer. His production profile has gotten some heat, and it's not flawless, but the model doesn't see it as terrible either. Now, another tight end the model really likes is Eli Stowers. And this isn't even influenced by late round COO David Kitchen, who's a big Vandy fan. Stowers was 6'4", 239 pounds at the combine, and he ran a 4.5 140. That gave him a 95th percentile speed score. And then he showed off a freaking 45.5-inch vertical, by far the best of the combine. Breakout score is one of the inputs in the tight end model too, not just the wide receiver one. And it's based on receiving yards per team pass attempt. And Stowers' score is one of the best in the class, and it's actually better than Sadiq's. There's a lot to like about his profile. Those two tight ends, they look like the clear best two according to the model. They both slayed the combine. The final player I want to talk about today is Jadarian Price. Now, there's still some chance that Price ends up as my RB2 in this class if he gets the draft capital, and if no other player in this class gets that capital outside of Jeremiah Love. But there's very little chance that I'm going to be high on him, that I'm going to like Jadarian Price more than the market. There's so much missing from his production profile because he played with Jeremiah Love, and I get that. I talked through that in the prospect guide at length. But here's the thing. If we're going to make excuses for Price, reasonable excuses, we need to fall back on something objective and tangible to feel good about a strong investment. And the combine did Price no favors, in my opinion. He was listed at 5'11", 209 pounds in college. At the combine, he came in at 5'11", 203 pounds. That's not nothing. When players are lighter than expected, you hope they run a faster 40 than you expect. You hope that's the reason. But Price had an incredibly normal 4.49 40. That resulted in an incredibly normal 99.9 speed score. He had the second best explosive run rate in this class across his career. That's according to PFF data. But that speed didn't necessarily match up with his speed score. I'm just concerned about this profile. I think it's really reasonable to be concerned. You have arguably the worst production profile in this entire draft class. And it's for a player who tested as just an above average athlete. There's a lot of projecting that has to go on here. And maybe that ends up working out. Maybe every single excuse ends up being totally valid. But to me, Price is going to have to find the perfect landing spot for me to get excited. Now, there were a lot of other players at the combine this year. I could have talked about a lot of different guys. Like, for instance, I think Skylar Bell had a great combine. Mekhi Lemon apparently had bad interviews. But I wanted to shout out who I think deserved to be shouted out the most. And now we just have to wait for these pro day numbers to come rolling in. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be talking about some broader combine takeaways on the Late Round show this week over on YouTube. That'll be on Wednesday at noon Eastern, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. And then it's a mailbag week, so I'll have that on Friday. I'll talk to you guys then.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? The right people can turn any drive into a great memory. That's something Toyota really believes. They design vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who make plans happen and bring everyone together. Inside, everything's built with passengers in mind. Comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that actually works so everyone can relax and enjoy the ride. There's room for the people, room for the stuff, and room for the moments that happen along the way. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people. Get almost anything you need delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parm delivered. A little escape? No. A delicious bowl of grapes? Yes, that. An afternoon stroll? Sorry, no. A burrito bowl? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.